Have your attention? Can anybody hear me? Okay. Try again. Now? Can you hear me now? Good afternoon, everybody.
There you go.
All right. Colleagues, I love the buzz. I'd like to get started. Nothing like a whistling mic to tone you down here. Well, good afternoon. I think that as the day continues, the excitement and the energy in here is really growing. And, you know, when I just stopped to think about it, I had the pleasure a couple of decades ago before I went to California to work at GW right here in the city. And I never, in all the years that I worked there, I never, ever tired of the fact that when I got up in the morning, I was in the nation's capital and all these important, exciting things going on. And I feel that way again today, and I hope that you all share that excitement with me. Our next topic is on the value and legality of unpaid internships, a topic that I know is near and dear to a lot of our hearts out there. This one has really been hotly debated for ages, but particularly in recent years. And here to discuss the issue in depth, we are very delighted to have Ross Eisenbrey, Vice President at the Economic Policy Institute, and Stephen M. Bloom, Director of Federal Relations, Government and Public Affairs at the American Council on Education, ACE. As Director of Government Relations at ACE, Steve's primary focus is on tax issues, as well as healthcare reform, labor and employment, and immigration. He came to ACE from the independent sector, where he served as Senior Lobbyist and Director of Government Relations. And in the fall of 2002, he served as counsel to the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee in the Labor Policy Office of U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy. He also worked at the United Jewish Communities as a senior legislative associate. Prior to coming to D.C., he was a practicing attorney for 10 years in Boston, focusing on litigation, including employment law, federal civil rights, torts, and commercial disputes. He also clerked for the Massachusetts Appeals Court. Vice President of EPI since 2003, Ross Eisenbrey is a lawyer and former commissioner of the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission. Prior to joining EPI, he worked for many years as a staff attorney and legislative director in the U.S. House of Representatives and as a committee counsel in the U.S. Senate. He served as policy director of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration from 1999 to 2001 and has testified numerous times in the House of Representatives and the Senate. He has written scores of articles, issues, briefs, and policy memos on a wide range of labor issues. Please join me with a warm NACE welcome for Stephen and Ross.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
So let me just make sure that this is going to work. It will. Okay, that's great. I have them in the wrong order, but that's my fault. Okay, so thank you all for having me. I have been a beneficiary of NACE's work in what I've written about interns over the past few years, and I'm going to refer to your own work in my remarks today, which are about the value and legality of internships, and in particular unpaid internships, because that is where the legal problem is. And there are three problems with these unpaid internships. Many are illegal, students are being harmed, and they damage the labor market. The damage that they do goes beyond the individual students and affects the rest of the labor market. But I'm going to start with the legality, which is I hope you can read that the print isn't too small. That is the Department of Labor's 6-part test, which is where you start in determining whether an internship for a for-profit employer is legal. Because these tests really don't apply to government internships. The government has generally given itself a special rule. You can volunteer for your services to the nation to your state and to your local government, and that's just the way it is. When the Congress covered itself by many of the labor laws, it took care to put in a special provision that said internships could be unpaid. So then nonprofits are a special category. This is less clear. I think it's fairly clear that you can volunteer your services to a food bank. You can volunteer for basically any 501c3 charity, and the Department of Labor will never give you a hard time. But there are some nonprofits who have been investigated and sued by the Department of Labor, and it really depends on their charitable purpose. And I'm not going to focus on that today. I'm really only going to talk about the legality of for-profit internships, unpaid internships. And so this fact sheet lays out six factors that have to be considered, and depending on where you are in the country, you have to satisfy, if you're an employer and you want to have an intern and not pay that intern, you have to satisfy all six. That is not true everywhere. It depends on which judicial circuit you're in. But basically, even where all six are applied, the courts will talk about the totality of the circumstances. They're trying to balance all of these things and figure out for themselves, is the intern really an employee or not? So the most important case in recent years on this is the district court decision in Fox Searchlight, Eric Glatt versus Fox Searchlight, which I'll call the Black Swan case because that's how it's mostly known, where the judge, and this is in the New York, in the Second Judicial Circuit, went through all six parts of this test very carefully and concluded that the plaintiffs in that case were employees and had to be paid. So for your purposes, I think one of the most important things that the judge held was that the fact that a student is getting course credit is essentially irrelevant to the question of whether she is an employee who must be paid. Okay? And I'm going to read a little bit from the decision. And this is a quote: "Defendants argue vigorously that the plaintiff has not met this requirement because she did not receive academic credit for her that plaintiff has not met this because she did receive academic credit for her internship. Receipt," the judge says, "of academic credit is of little moment. A university's decision to grant academic credit is not a determination that an unpaid internship complies with the law. Universities may add additional requirements or coursework for students receiving internship credit, but the focus of the law is on the requirements and training provided by the employer." So, that's very important. The Department of Labor, in a series of cases in New England in the last year or two, has investigated employers who have been receiving from, I think it's really one college has been sending all of them interns. The employer has not, these employers have not been paying. The Department of Labor said, this is illegal. The fact that they're getting course credit doesn't matter. The fact is that they're making hats or sweaters on an assembly line, and they are not interns. Some courts have boiled down the entire inquiry, and I think Stephen might be going through these in some detail, but the first four are the important ones. The first one is that that it's an educational environment, and that it's really providing education to the intern. The second is that this whole experience is for the benefit of the intern. The third, that the intern does not displace regular employees. And in the Fox Searchlight case, witnesses for the employer admitted that they had replaced, that these interns actually were replacing employees. And the fourth is, some would say, the most important, that the training the employer derives no immediate advantage from the activities of the intern. So ideally, an internship should be something where the employer is actually giving, not taking, where they're providing educational experience. It's actually a nuisance. It's actually something that costs the employer something. We have internships. We pay our interns. But I can tell you that, when it's really an educational experience, you have to give your time as the employer, and it can be very time-consuming and take you from doing other things. It's not just putting somebody up at the front desk and having them answer the phone and, all the things that go on in these internships. So undoubtedly, the judge said the plaintiffs received benefits from their internships, such as, and all of you have heard this, resume listings, job references, an understanding of how the production office worked, of how the business worked. The judge said those benefits are incidental to working in the office like any other employee and are not the result of an internship intentionally structured to benefit them. Resume listings and job references result from any work relationship, paid or unpaid, and are not the academic or vocational training benefits envisioned by the factor, by factors 1, 2, and 4. So the judge held that they were employees. And that case is on appeal, and if the Second Circuit upholds it, I think it will change drastically how for-profit employers approach unpaid internships in the future. But the second thing I want to say is that in addition to many of these being illegal, and Nancy Lepink, who was the acting administrator for the Wage and Hour Division, told the New York Times that the vast majority of these are going to be illegal. It's very hard for a for-profit employer to structure something that will meet these tests. But there's also the harm that you have documented. NACE itself has documented. Students who had an unpaid internship of any kind did not do better, significantly better in terms of full-time job offers than people who had no internship at all. The differential was 0.2 of a percentage point to 2.5 percentage points. Just, marginally better than having no internship at all. But they did significantly worse than students who had a paid internship. And that's the important thing. The students who take an unpaid internship as opposed to a paid internship are doing themselves significant harm. A paid for-profit internship led to a 67% job offer rate versus 37% for unpaid for-profit internships. Okay, so you're less likely to get a job offer, radically less likely if your internship was unpaid. But earlier NACE studies also showed, and I think this is really important, unpaid interns receive lower salary offers than students who never had an internship. They do worse than students who had no internship at all. And that's across the board, whether it's government, federal or state or local, nonprofit or for-profit. And it's especially dramatic in the for-profit area where students who had taken unpaid internships earned $18,000 less. Their job offers were $18,000 less on average than paid interns, and $3,700 less than students who had never had an internship at all. So this is why everyone ought to be, in your sphere, ought to be very careful about ever sending somebody to an unpaid internship. Okay, you can speculate, why would this be? Why would they do worse? And one possible answer is that by doing this, they're signaling to employers. Students who take unpaid internships are signaling, I'm willing to work for nothing. I'm willing to work for less than someone who, values their contribution or has more confidence or whatever it is. But employers apparently understand this and are taking advantage of it. Okay, then there's the more obvious harm to students, which is that they're not being paid for work that they're doing, even as their debts are increasing, and you all know what that picture looks like. I'm just going to give you a quick, back of the envelope assume there are 500,000 students working unpaid each year. They receive no benefits, or benefits for their work. And you assume, let's say, 10 weeks at the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, they would have earned $1.4 billion. That's how much money employers are keeping to themselves and not giving to students. It's a big transfer of wealth from to CEOs and stock owners of these companies who don't need this money nearly as much as the students who are, by and large, indebted and starting their careers or low wage. And this is true whether it's a for-profit company or a nonprofit. It's a transfer from people like the CEO of many of the nonprofits here in Washington who are making $500,000 a year. They're taking from these students. They're taking their crummy $7.25 an hour and putting it into their own paycheck. And I think, personally, that it may not be illegal, it's wrong, it's immoral. And then finally, there's the harm that goes to the economy and to college students themselves. What have I done? I've done something terrible. How do we get back there?
Somebody's coming.
Okay. I'm just going to show you 2 slides. I could show you a million slides about what's happening in the labor market, but I'm just going to show you 2. Oops. Oh, I leaned on that. Maybe the green one up there would blow it up. The green. Okay. Thank you. So what does it do to the value of a college education if college students who are getting more education are working for free? I'm not going to tell you that that's what's causing this, but you can see what's happened to the real entry-level wages of college graduates, and they are not doing very well. Since 2000, you can see they've fallen. They're actually lower than they were in 2000, and they're really not much better than they were, just a few pennies better than they were all the way back in 1973. And women are doing better, a little better than they were back in 1973, but they also, their wages, entry-level wages, have fallen since 2000. And you can see that this is the growth in college graduate wages, and it just breaks that number into looking at it by decile. And you can see that people at the median, the 50th line there, have lost 3% in terms of their wages over that period. The only group that's done better, even at the 70th percentile, they're doing worse. Only college students, college graduates at the 90th percentile are earning more than they did in 2000. So that's what's happening to the labor market. And underemployment, is terrible for college graduates right now. 28% of all college graduates are underemployed. 40% of college graduates under 24 are underemployed. My message to you is you don't want to do anything to encourage this. And I think we need to do everything we can to lift wages. Letting people work without being paid drags down the labor market for everybody. Bad employment practices tend to drive out good employment practices. They lead to a race to the bottom. And you can see the history of this. Vernon Stone, a journalism professor at University of Missouri, documented, as he said, how unpaid internships, once rolling, tended to crowd out the paid ones off the road. From 81% of all internships in radio being paid in 1976, by 1991 it was only 32%. And I think, if you followed that, it would be even worse today. So I'm going to stop there. I think I was only supposed to talk for 10 minutes, and I'm sure I have, but I will answer questions later if you have them. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's not often that I follow somebody who was on the Colbert Report. I can't offer that to you, but I'll try my best, nonetheless.
There you go.
Before Ross and I think, do different things, and I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about based on what my job is and my role at ACE. But I'll give you a little bit of background about ACE. I understand that NACE is a new member of ACE, so I'll quietly, virtually applaud to that. I think that's great. ACE is the umbrella organization for higher education in the United States. We have about 1,800 members that are members, individual institutions. They're members through their presidents and chancellors, their senior-most officer, and that includes everybody from community colleges to the major research universities, public and private, and everybody in between. I'm really talking about traditional higher education. I'm not talking about the for-profit sector. And in addition to the individual institutions, we have about 200 associations like NACE, and many, many others. I sometimes joke that we cut at ever finer levels of prosciutto. I mean, you have the different associations that represent segments of higher education smaller than ACE, like the Community Colleges Association or the Private Colleges Association. And then the individual officers, so the financial aid officers, the business officers, the bursars, all the people that you experience and encounter and work with probably on a daily basis in your individual campuses. And they all have associations, and they're all often members of ACE. So that's just to give you a little bit of a flavor of the world that I come from. And to turn to sort of the substance of what we're talking about today. And in the introduction, it was mentioned that part of my portfolio has to do with labor and employment, and that's where the piece about internships comes in. It isn't, to tell you the truth, a big piece of the work on labor and employment, and that's really because there hasn't been a lot of activity in Washington related to the whole question of internships, whether paid or unpaid. And we can talk about that in a minute. And maybe there's a role for you all to play in trying to make it a bigger part of the debate here in Washington. But as for the Fair Labor Standards Act and the Department of Labor 6 guidelines that were issued at the beginning of the Obama administration, that really just reiterated, I think, what was the law under the Fair Labor Standards Act. I don't think there was a huge change in what they were trying to do in these 6 factors. So I don't think the world has changed all that much in terms of what the requirements are. And in fact, I ultimately think, I suspect that in the Black Swan case, which Ross mentioned, that's on appeal, I would imagine that the trial court, the district court's decision is going to be upheld. We'll see how that plays out. ACE was recently approached to file an amicus brief in the case. I'm not sure how we're going to come out on that. But it is something we're watching closely. I mean, all I would say to you on that, and you all know this from your daily lives, that higher education wants to ensure that students who are placed in internships, whether it's paid or unpaid, that the employers are following the law, right? And we certainly don't want to put our students in situations where they're exploited. It's not really in the interest of the student. It's not in the interest of what you all are trying to accomplish. So when the Department of Labor came out with this clarification, some of our members, I think, were a little concerned that it might have a chilling effect on the way in which employers would respond to participation in internships or cooperative education programs. And so I got involved a little bit in an effort by Northeastern University, led an effort to collect a number of signatures from university presidents to send a letter to the Department of Labor. And I think the letter really was, it wasn't, we disagree with what you're doing, it was more a question of be careful the impact of what you're doing. It may have a chilling effect, a broader chilling effect than you may intend on the world of this experiential learning. And that followed a letter from Senator Kerry that I worked with Northeastern to help get sent to the Department of Labor, again, sort of reiterating the same point. It's not that that, people want, that we understand what the Fair Labor Standards Act law is. We don't want students exploited, but be careful about doing something that's going to cause a chilling effect, and it's going to serve as a disincentive for employers to participate in good, meaningful, experiential learning for these students. So, really, the question why we're here today is sort of the debate between paid and unpaid internships. And I don't think we would disagree very much that in an ideal world, all internships should be paid. I mean, if we had a world that we could create from the start, sure, absolutely. Unfortunately, that's not the world that we all live in. And we live in a time when the cost of college attendance is going up and up and up. Really, if you look at where the greatest rise has been, for those of you in the audience who are working at public institutions, intuitively, states have for the last 20 years or so engaged in a disinvestment in public higher education. So the highest rate of tuition growth has been in the public higher education world. And so that's a challenge for students. It's a challenge for them to be able to pay for college and to pay for these really valuable experiential learning experiences that you all help facilitate. So I think what that means is that you all, and to the extent that we can assist you all, people like me as a lobbyist, can assist you all in creating mechanisms to ensure that there's no real distinction between who has the ability to access a valuable experiential learning setting based on their socioeconomic background, right? You don't want the young person who happens to come from a low-income background, who's on a Pell Grant, not to be able to do that great experience that's going to, be a huge and important thing for them in their lives, and potentially in their ability down the road. It may shape the kind of choices they make in terms of their careers. It may shape their ability to get a job. Right. We know that. We just want to make sure that we do our best to ensure that all students get those opportunities. The thing is, though, that and I got this really from talking to one of your colleagues at one of the universities that has the largest experiential learning programs in the country, and this was something that I didn't really think about so much before starting to prepare for this. It really is that the question of paid and unpaid it's an important question, but it's only one question. The other question that this person said to me, and I think you all know this intuitively, is what's the experience about? Is this a really valuable learning experience? And that's what I heard from her, is that's where you start, right? You need to, when you're evaluating whether an internship is inappropriate, you want to ensure that student, when they go in there, that they're not just licking envelopes, that they're doing something that actually they're going to learn from, and that their skills are going to be enhanced by. So that's sort of on one side of the ledger, and then the question is of compensation is on the other side of the ledger. And so those are two sort of factors that you're probably looking at and thinking about when evaluating, an internship opportunity from a particular, entity. Now, really, what we're talking about here today are private, for-profit. Entities, corporations, companies, et cetera, because that's where the law is that Ross was laying out, the debate. I mean, most nonprofits and government entities, either because of the way the Fair Labor Standards Act is structured or been implemented, or in some cases, in the case of Congress, which specifically exempted itself from the application, those are, those non-paying internships they're exempt from this requirement. But I guess I would raise a question, and I think you probably all have the same questions in your own minds, which is that if we take all unpaid internships off the table, is that really in the interest of our students? Because there are, I'm sure we could all point to unpaid internships that are incredibly valuable. I know that the White House internship program is an unpaid internship program, and I don't think any of us would want to see that one taken off the table just because it's unpaid, right? So I think that's why I think the debate is a little more complicated than this question of paid and unpaid. I know that NACE has done some surveys on the value of internships. There aren't really, as I understand it, the Department of Labor and the Bureau of Labor Statistics don't really have any. They don't put out hard statistics on internships. I do think, and you all know this intuitively and from your experience working in the field, that internships, the importance of internships has gone up over the last many years. I remember long ago when I was a college student doing an internship on the Hill, an unpaid internship, and in those days it wasn't that common. This is in the prehistoric time. But now it is much more common. My own daughter, who's in college right now, just finished an internship in New York. So, and it's a very common thing for students to do that, much more common than it was a number of years ago. And I know that the Chronicle of Higher Education in 2012, they did a survey of employers, and in their survey they found basically that I'll quote this to you: the single most important credential for college graduates to have on their resumes is an internship experience. So. And that, I don't think that's at odds with the recent NACE findings. I know that you all put out a sort of a clarification about those findings because it's a little more complicated, the picture that the findings represent. I do think that intuitively and anecdotally, I think we all understand the value of these experiences, both in the near and long term for students. So. Let me think. I'll skip over this piece. I guess on financial need, and I don't know whether you all are aware of this. You probably are. I don't want to mean to be in any way presumptuous about this. Let me ask you a question. How many of you all in your roles on campus work with other offices to ensure that a student where they have a work study grant and they are going to be doing an internship while they're enrolled in school, are potentially able to use a work study funding to help support them on that internship? Could you all raise your hands? So not very many. Now, it's not a criticism, you all. You should know, and you probably do know this, that the federal work study in its current structure does permit students to get support for an internship while they're attending school. So that doesn't mean a summer internship unless they're in summer school, but it does mean internships during the fall and spring semesters. Now I understand, and I see there's a question out there. We'll have time for question and answers. I understand that oftentimes the money, the federal work study money that the individual institution is allocated gets taken up on campus. It's often a way that schools basically run the school. They take a student, and they put them in an administrative slot, or they put them in the food service, et cetera, and that's how the work study allocation money is used. I understand. I'm not blaming anyone. All I'm saying is that the FWS program does permit this, and I think to the extent that there are opportunities for you all to be advocates on campus with the financial aid office, where an institution doesn't fully utilize its work study allocation, need to find ways, I think, to take advantage of that for your students who are really have need for it. I guess I know that there are other instances where individual institutions are themselves coming to step up to the plate to find ways to support students on internships, and that's a terrific thing. And again, that there is a role I think for you all to play. I'm sure you do your best on this to try and ensure that schools think about that. I think it's really a question of consciousness. That in a time where these experiences are increasingly valuable and much more common, we want to make sure that, again, as I said before, that somebody based on socioeconomic status isn't excluded from one of these opportunities. The last thing I will mention on this particular question is that there is some legislation. There was a bill that was introduced earlier this summer called the Opportunities for Success Act of 2013. And it really, it creates, it would create, if it passed, a grant program for schools to utilize to assist, based on need, students who are going to be on internships. And I think it hasn't gone anywhere, but that's not surprising because not much is happening in Washington at the moment. as you all read in the papers, and sure as you see as your brief visit here. But also, it takes time to get legislation enacted. And I think, as I know that NACE is just really embarking on sort of the advocacy kind of world, this is something you ought to think seriously about. Do you want to get behind an effort to try and get federal support for to help students, to do unpaid internships? I think it's, that's up to you to decide. And, to the extent that we at ACE can be helpful, if that's something that you're interested in doing, we're happy to do that. So I will turn to one other question that I think may be of interest to you, and then I'll sit down and we can, happy to answer any questions. This is related. It's not really on the unpaid internship question that we're debating or at least discussing here today, but I'll mention it because I think it's probably of some interest to all of you, because it came to us from, I think it was Northeastern or maybe one of the other heavy co-op schools, maybe RIT, I'm not sure, but it was a question of the impact of the Affordable Care Act on internships. And it came to us because that's part of my portfolio, and the question was, does the employer requirement, the so-called employer mandate, would it apply to students who are working at a for-profit entity for more than 30 hours a week over a specified time period? Would an employer be required to offer that student employer health insurance? It's really not a resolved question. And what I was told, and this may be your experience too, that most students, they either have their health insurance through their parents up to age 26, or they have it through the student health insurance program at your individual institutions, or if they're graduate students particularly at the Tier 1 institutions, they get often they get as part of their graduate package student health insurance. In any case, we've been communicating with Treasury and the IRS, which is responsible for issuing the regulations, on a range of issues. But this is one issue that we have asked for clarification from Treasury, the Treasury Department on, because we think that it could have a chilling effect on the willingness of for-profit employers to participate in internship and cooperative education programs, and I don't think any of us wants to see that. But we also don't want to. I don't think we're in a situation where students would go without health insurance. I don't think we want to see that happen either. So anyway, I think I've probably gone over my limit. So I will sit down and happy to answer questions.
Thank you. So I suspect we're going to have quite a few questions from the audience, but let me just toss out a couple things and ask each of you to, first of all, Ross, do you have any comments to make about some of the things Steve said that may be in somewhat a different perspective of yours?
Actually, there was one thing. I think that it's a false dichotomy to say that we'll have, if we don't have unpaid internships, we won't have internships at all. Like the White House internships actually were paid until the Obama administration, and then as a budget-cutting gesture, they wiped out the paid internships. But they could, obviously, the federal government can afford to have paid internships in the White House, just the way Atlantic Media decided that they would now have paid, instead of their former practice of unpaid internships. They actually went back and paid people who had worked for them 2 years before unpaid. They paid them for their summer work, and now they are very generous. I mean, it's not even the minimum wage. They're paying their interns $10 an hour or something. The Nation, I'm getting every week examples of employers who have changed their practice. So I think, as you said, we grew up in a world where there weren't unpaid internships, where you worked the copy machine at the business, and delivered things and got people ice cream or whatever it was, and you got paid for it, and you got paid the minimum wage at least. I was able to pay for my law school back when law school was cheap at the University of Michigan, on an entry-level job as a messenger clerk. So, that's a better world, and to say that the world is different now doesn't mean it has to be that way. I would like to see a world that was more like the one that I grew up in, where people got paid for their work.
I wouldn't disagree with that, and I think you maybe I didn't articulate it as clearly as I should. I don't think we should. I mean, to the extent that we can be advocates for internships being paid, we should do that, right? You all have conversations with employers all the time, whether they're government employers, nonprofits, for-profit entities. That you have those conversations. And I'm sure you all are advocates. Absolutely. My point is just that it's only one factor in evaluating the value of an internship, whether there's compensation or not. So,
I just let me ask another question then, and maybe being really specific. Do we have any data on companies that are changing their practice, the impact on the volume of opportunities that they may be able to extend?
I don't have.
Well, we
that
have
data
some
yet. I think
anecdotal
it's-
data about that at UCLA.
It's still new.
Yeah, where a lot of the major studios are indeed moving to a paid internship model. And after years of complaining about the slave labor
Yeah.
that our students have endured, I have seen that these paid internships, at the exclusion of unpaid now, have dramatically reduced the volume. And I've actually heard from many of you from around the country wondering how we're dealing with it at UCLA, because you have a lot of alumni and students who are finding it much more competitive to get those internship opportunities. But it's such an incredibly complicated situation, and I think that there's probably some people in the audience that would really like to ask some questions of the two of you. And Marilyn's going to help me recognize you.
Yeah, I can speak real loud. Are we in any jeopardy, college career centers, if we provide funding for students and unpaid internships? Some of those may be illegal. I'm not saying they are.
I don't think so. The obligation is on the employer,
Yeah,
not
right.
on you. So I've never heard of
Yeah.
anyone creative enough to
Right.
drag in a school.
I'm not sure where the liability would rise for you.
Thanks.
There is actually I'm sorry. There is one possible problem, which is that when you're an unpaid intern, you're not an employee, you are not covered by the equal protection laws. You're not protected against sexual harassment in the workplace,
Yeah.
for example. So I think a creative attorney could find a way to say that if you direct somebody to that kind of a situation where they are then injured, that you might have some responsibility.
If you knew or should have known,
Right.
like if there was a long history of problems at a particular employer.
Right.
Yeah.
Will Simpkins, I'm at John Jay in City University of New York. I have a concern about how we're framing the conversation about internships around the salary that a student could find after they graduate. And I guess the question is actually for Nace, and I'm hoping the data folks are here. When we looked at that data, are we comparing apples and oranges? Are we lumping for-profit internships and non-for-profit internships together?
No.
And then, because I could see a nonprofit student who does a nonprofit internship, yes, would make $18,000
No,
less.
this was actually comparing. They were very careful, and Ed is up there who did it.
Great,
Yeah.
great.
To compare students who were in an unpaid state or local, unpaid, versus paid state or local, unpaid federal government versus paid federal government, unpaid nonprofit versus paid nonprofit. It was apples to apples comparisons.
Yeah, that's right. We were very careful to separate the types of internships, government internships, nonprofit internships, and for-profit internships. And the relationship basically held across the board for all of them. The numbers weren't great enough for us to separate by industry. That would have been helpful because it might have impacted some of that information. But we were able to separate by major, and the relationship still held. So.
Okay.
Right there.
White sweater?
To the-
Sorry, two white sweaters. I have the mic. Do the standards for the FLSA change if it's a U.S. company operating overseas?
I don't think that the Fair Labor Standards Act applies extraterritorial.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's a
extraterritorially.
good legal question.
Yeah. I think just like a company that operates in the U.S. is bound to pay people here, according to U.S. law. I think if you go to Germany or Great Britain, a U.S. company has to follow their law, not ours.
Just follow up on the work study federal option. That could be an all-day discussion, I assume, but are there resources we can look into? Or do you have examples to share now and resources to refer for that?
Well, I could certainly, the work study regulations are long established. I could certainly get you that. The National Association of Student Financial Aid Officers Association, I'm sure they would be happy to, this is where I got the information from. I consulted with them beforehand. And I'm sure that NASA would be more than happy to provide you all guidance about the ways in which federal work study could be utilized, on your campuses. And they're the ones that represent the financial aid officers on your campuses. And so, the extent that there could be, you can help forge a better relationship between what you all do and the financial aid officers, and I'm sure that would be terrific.
Is that for students doing an internship on campus?
No, the FWS regulations permit that while a student's enrolled, so we're talking about, while they're, actually in semester. So if they're enrolled in the summertime, taking a couple of courses during summer school, I assume it would apply as well. But let's just take the situation where it's fall or spring, that the FWS, the work study regulations, permit private employers to employ students under a work study grant, and they can be internships. Now, there are certain conditions that have to be met. For nonprofits, there has to be there's a match. It's as little as 10% and potentially up to 25% of the student's salary. For for-profit entities, I believe it's a 50-50 match. And there are some other criteria that are laid out in the federal work study regulations. I don't think they would be that difficult for you to navigate. I think the harder question, and I saw some nods as I was talking about it, is there available federal work study money on campus that's out there that hasn't already been assigned? And I don't know that question. You all know that better than I do because you're on campus. The question, I think the thing is to keep in your mind that it's an option. It presents an opportunity, and for you all to be creative and to try and do your best on campus to where there are instances where universities haven't fully utilized their allocation, that you see if you can capture those dollars.
Right there. Down, up, about. Right. Raise your hand, please. There.
Just to clarify on that, because this is brand new to me, I didn't know that you could use federal work study in that way, and that would be huge on our campus because many students are not taking advantage of internships because they do have to work. So for instance, I have a student right now who is sacrificing her federal work study in our office to do an internship. So is it a student-by-student basis or is it completely campus-wide if there's money?
I mean, it applies to an institution.
But can she get her money that she's entitled to even though she's still doing her internship, or does it...
Well, the way it would work so let's say, you have a student who's working fall semester in your office, and then in spring semester she goes out on an internship, and you might take the money that was allocated to her to work in your office in the fall could potentially be allocated to her to work on that internship. If it's a for-profit entity, as I said, there's a match component. There are other criteria for how that what has to be done. I don't think they're insurmountable. They don't seem all that difficult to me when I looked at them for a for-profit, for a company to navigate to ensure that the student gets a portion of the funding from work study. And it's probably in the interest of the employer too, because if they get a bright young person who's willing to work, and they may be able to and they're willing to pay, they may be able to get that student for a smaller cost to the employer that the federal government is going to match by way of a work-study allocation. So, but I would consult with your financial aid officers on campus.
I think we have time for, did I see 2 hands up? 2 more questions. Take one right here.
Just a quick question. Does FLSA have any exemptions for employers below a certain size?
Yes and no. The general cutoff is around $500,000 of revenue, but there's also that's the test for a small business exclusion. But if you're in commerce, if the employee is doing work that's in commerce, the employee is covered, even though the employer doesn't have establishment coverage. So there's no simple answer to your question, but it's a very small revenue cutoff at the establishment level.
Okay, last question in the back.
Or enterprise, actually.
Hi, this has been incredibly interesting, and certainly those of us who are here from NYU have been very much in the media about the unpaid internship question, which we now choose to call non-paying internships. But I think a couple of things that you raised, and I want to just get the panel's perspective, and Kathy actually touched on it when she talked about seeing the studios starting to pay. One of the impacts that we are starting to see, so you mentioned the Atlantic Monthly, and we can talk about NBC and the NFL and Major League Baseball, who all are now paying their interns. However, the interns are now post-graduation. So in other words, why is it better, I'm just asking the question philosophically, that if you can provide a qualitative experience that's documented qualitative why a student is enrolled in academics, to then let them graduate, onboard them as a $10 an hour intern, keeping them under 30 hours so you don't have to pay their benefits, delaying a full-time job, which essentially is what is going on in entertainment and media in a huge wave. Right on this stage where you three are sitting, we had, at the time, the director of talent for NPR saying very proudly, we pay all our interns. Oh, but by the way, they have to have a bachelor's degree. So I just would be very curious, with every problem you solve, there's also now a whole new set, a wave of going to be underemployed college graduates, and that has great impact for the session we started out this morning with our outcomes. So I don't know if that's a question, but I would love you to react to it.
Well, my reaction is really you're looking at it from the wrong end of the telescope, because you could have, unlimited, unpaid internships, but still the question is, the important question from a labor market perspective is, what kind of work will people have? Either when they're in school trying to pay for it, trying to pay for their education, or afterward when they're trying to, support themselves, eventually buy a house, have a family, whatever. Okay, so if we're changing unpaid entry-level work into paid entry-level work, I see that as an unqualified good thing, because you used to have a situation, and I know because I've talked to Eric Latt, who was one of the plaintiffs, where you just had this mass of people working for nothing for the film industry. And the chances of any of them getting a job, were minuscule. Most of them did not get work at the end of their unpaid, sometimes multiple unpaid internships. I think we're better off with a system where when you're working, you're paid and people know what their chances are and they don't waste their opportunities, and everything is above board. It hasn't been for too many years above board.
What I would say to that is, they're probably, let's take the NFL, I don't know why they decided to switch to paid, probably because they got bad press. And I think bad press for them, to the extent that they're trying to avoid, paying interns while they're in college, I think they'll be sensitive to that, and as they should be. I mean, I don't think there's anybody in this room would think that the NFL is a poor, starving entity.
Multi-billion.
Or the film industry. I mean, I think that, we all have to find ways to hold them accountable, whether it's by way of legislation or just by putting pressure on them to do the right thing. I mean, they will benefit from having bright young people work for them. They do benefit. And I don't, and they also are, I think they ought to be mindful of the fact that the cost of college is going up, and that students increasingly are having a difficult time managing that. And so, these wealthy entities ought to find a way to be able to pay their interns while they're in school. Now, one other thing that you had asked asked potentially as a question, then I'll shut up. The question was, how can you all on your campuses work in ways that maybe facilitate our work here? And I guess what I would say to you is, one, I don't know what your advocacy agenda is going to be. Maybe you all haven't figured that out yet, and I know it's a new thing. That's great, and if we can help you frame that, that's terrific. But I also would, if I were you all, I would get to know if your campus has a lobbyist, a federal relations rep, and many schools now do have them. They either have them on staff or they retain outside folks. I'd get to know them. I would sit down. I would have a meeting with them, and I'd talk to them about what you're experiencing in your office in terms of internships, and pick their brain about the ways in which they can be helpful in trying to find ways to enhance access for all students to internships. And I think actually you'd find a ready audience. Now, I know that would be really helpful to me, and I don't say that in a selfish way, because oftentimes when I get information from people that helps me in my advocacy, I get it from the federal relations rep on a campus. And sometimes if they don't have it, they turn around and they go and they find the appropriate person on campus. But if they've already talked to you and you all have helped shape their thinking about it, it's going to be up front when they're thinking about these issues, and I think that it's likely to be more effective.
Can I just
Yes.
put in?
Please.
Stephen mentioned this legislation that would provide federal help so that people of lesser means would be able to take internships in Washington, for example, that are too often only available to wealthier families. That legislation was introduced by Susan Bonamici, I think,
Right.
from
Oregon.
Oregon. And I hope you'll all take a look at it and think about how it might help your students and become advocates for it, because legislation does take a long time, but 5 years from now, 6 years from now, that could get to the floor of the House of Representatives, and it would be a great thing.
Well, thank you both very much. I really appreciate it. I think one of my takeaways, and I know Marilyn's going to provide us some summary of the whole day, but one of my takeaways, particularly from this, is not just how we as individuals on our campuses can maybe have some influence by working with the legislative representatives on our campus or people who are in the position to inform Steve and Ross and all of their work, but then it might be part of the agenda for the NACE Advocacy Advisory Committee to create tools that will help us all do this in our work in a much more impactful way. And so I really appreciate this. As chair of this committee that is putting this on, it's been really helpful and enlightening. And once again, I'd just like everybody to thank you very much for your time today.
Well, I'm Marilyn Mackis, for those of you who have not met me, and I think a good number of the people in this room have. And I've been in this profession, I have to admit, for pushing on 30 years. And I feel like today is a phenomenal first for me personally and professionally, because for a very long time, so many of my colleagues, some of you here in this room and many that are not in this room, have been asking for the opportunity to come together and to really get our profession behind the issues, to take a voice and make a difference out there for our institutions, our students, and all the people that we serve. And I really feel that today is a great, phenomenal first step. The daunting task I have, of course, is that I'm supposed to give you all the takeaways, and I guarantee you I will not be able to sum up all the takeaways you had today. But I will say, and I actually took a lot of notes, and I could go through, I probably have about 20 pages on my mini here, and I'm not going to read them all back to you. But so what I'm going to do is quickly summarize them, because I know we all have places to be and things to do. But I hope the key ones are these. First of all, this last conversation that we heard, I think, was so incredibly significant for us to relate to all of the topics we talked about today. And that is that we can play a very important part, individually and collectively. So go back to your campuses. Think about, as Kathy pointed out, think about how you can be working with the people on campus, whether it's your government relations people, your colleagues, any kind of coalitions that you think we should be part of. And you heard us say that we're, as an organization, beginning to work more and more with other associations and other groups. We're very pleased that we're working with MWW to help us identify where we need to be and who we need to be talking to. You may be a great resource to us who are kind of helping to pull things together, as Kathy pointed out. So we would welcome any suggestions and ideas you have around that. But we also think that it's important for all of us to have play that role and take on that responsibility as well. I would also mention that I think, I could summarize, and I think I could probably remember a lot of the bullet points on the screens today and things people said, but let me just pull it together in a couple of things. I think, first of all, we had a great group of presenters today, and they gave us a lot of ideas to think about. My perception is that there are probably a lot more questions that have surfaced, a lot more to-dos that we have when we leave here. And I would encourage us all to think about what those might be. So I think, for example, as we're talking about the unpaid internships and the issues that, there were some ideas that I think that came up in that discussion that force us to look at it through a different lens, to think about it differently than it might have been in the past, to get more information, and again, this applies to all of the areas, share best practices with each other as we're thinking about what we could be doing differently. You know, from the very basic question, I don't know if it's that basic, but is what we're doing illegal or not legal? Where do we get the information we need to find out how to pursue a direction we want to take? I think it's important that we actually try to connect with the right people and get the right information. And NACE is trying to take on that responsibility for our membership. I would say that when we're talking about the STEM issue, I think we're all going to walk away with the flower image in our minds, right? Which I think is a wonderful image. And I think the big word that kept getting repeated over and over again is how complex it is, and how we have high expectations around resolving these things, but we know that there are so many hills to climb and barriers and varying perspectives on it. But as I've heard over and over again, I think Heather Stewart shared this with us, is that we have the power to try to help make a difference. Talk with your representatives. You know, get out there, make sure they know the issues, not just on campus, but your own representatives, so that they're aware of some of these issues and how they impact your institution and the work that you have a passion for doing. Finally, I would go back to saying that the first topic of the day, could we not have done that for like a week, I think? And I remember the first thing that was said by Manny, and that is, we are in this for the long haul. And we are in this. can dice it in different ways. It gives us insight. It gives us direction. It provides a foundation, really, for what's to come after us. So I really think that the people in this room, the people that, I don't know, how many did we have on our website today, Mallory?
The first hour, we had 300 hits and about 200 plus downloads.
That's of the standards that were shared this morning, because we shared them out simultaneously on the website. So just so you know, all the action today wasn't just in this room. It was outside of this room. I do think that, I think it was Bill from Binghamton up there. You're going to be my hero for the day. He looked at this whole situation as an opportunity. He looked at it and said, this is really not a perfect storm of like the kind of movie I actually watched Perfect Storm not too long ago. It's a rather depressing movie. This is a perfect storm that's really a great opportunity. I will tell you, as Ed Koch and I have been out meeting, at the White House, Department of Education and legislators, congressmen, senators, et cetera, everybody is interested. They know this matters. I think we have the opportunity here, as you pointed out, Bill, to really drive direction and make a difference. And I do think it's critically important, as Manny shared with us earlier, that we do this collectively. This is something where I really think, as a profession, we can get behind. So with that, I really want to wrap by simply saying we owe a lot of thanks to people. It wasn't on my shoulders here. I'm here to help make it happen. But we had roughly 150 people weigh in, help plan a committee of a task force of about 20 people or so. We have the Advocacy Advisory Committee. We have a board. And obviously, all the people that took the time today, you sitting here, and the people virtually, who, by the way, are tweeting about this too, who are really committing themselves and investing themselves. And I think it's so important that we not just end today. So one of the last things I want to leave you with is this. We will be following up on this First Destinations piece with a webinar for those who aren't here. And if you want repeat performance, you can always sign up for it. We will be seeing more about this at upcoming conferences. You'll be seeing more about this on our advocacy pages on the website. If you haven't been on NACEWeb lately, we do have advocacy pages on the website now. So I would encourage you to stay informed, not just on this particular issue, but any of the issues we've been raising today. You'll probably be seeing more in the journal, more in Spotlight. This is something that is one of our 4 core strategic goals, and that is to be a voice for the profession and to really strengthen us as a profession going forward. And advocacy is going to make that happen. So hopefully this is just the first of many. And I want to thank NYU. Are you in the room? Trudy, wave, for being our host today. Very, very generously offered this space to us, and I think it was an ideal space. I think we owe a lot to all the planners. I'm not going to list all the names. But most importantly, I want to really thank you all for your investment of time and energy. This was a truly engaged group, and I appreciate it, and I hope we can continue to have that going forward. So thanks so much, everybody.